let's just take a moment and pray together, and we'll begin. Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you so much for today, God. The worship was amazing. God, just being able to be in your presence and be around people that want to know you and want to grow closer in their relationship with you, God, it's so good. And Lord, I pray that as I speak today, Lord, that you would speak through me, God, that our hearts would be open to receive what it is you have for each of us, God, and that looks different for every single one of us. So God, may you speak, and God, may we have ears to hear what you have to say to us. It's in your name we pray. Amen. So when I was in like 8th grade, I had probably the moment I had the biggest trouble I ever got into in school. Like last night we had a little meal and we were talking about the most trouble you ever got into. And I said that with my parents, when I actually got caught for something, it was probably shooting birds in the backyard when my dad had specifically told me not to. But in school, the biggest punishment I ever got was a spanking. And this was in 8th grade. And I was in a chapel service, and it was during the worship time. And so we've got people up on stage leading us in worship. And I'm, in the crowd just joking around with my friends, tapping people on this side, and walking over here, all that kind of stuff, just being silly. And this is going on during the whole worship time. And the superintendent of the school is in the chapel with us, and he sees me, and he sees a couple of my friends, and he points at one of my friends, and he says, tell him to stop. Tell him to stop. And I never got that message, okay? That never got relayed to me. I thought I was great. Everything was okay. And then, so I'm just, kind of right in the middle of acting mischievous, and Mr. Chase walks to my aisle, points at me, goes like this, points at the other two next to me, and he just grabs all three of us and just walks us out, like this. And Mr. Chase was a big man, but he was really old, okay? He was on his last legs as a superintendent, getting ready to retire. And so he was not young, okay, like Dr. C. Dr. C, this guy looks like a young buck compared to Mr. Chase. Mr. Chase was old, and so I was not too concerned about what he could actually do to me physically to hurt me. But he said, guys, y'all are getting spankings. And he said, I've not spanked anybody in years. I'm going to have to get the paddle out of retirement. And so he walks down to his car. We're all sitting there. He goes into his trunk, pulls it out, comes back up, and I'm up first. And I remember just, I was a little bit intimidated when I saw the size of the paddle, but I still was thinking, he can't have that much force behind it. And so he told me to bend over and touch my knees or my feet or whatever. And at that point in my life, I could still stretch. And so I did that. And when I kind of looked back, my first clue that I was in for something was when I realized how far away he was. He was back against the wall. He kind of had his foot on the wall, he was going to push off. And I was like, where is he getting all this energy from? I've never seen him this excited before. And he came in and he, followed through and everything. And I remember in that moment just the pain, and I was just in shock. And then he said, now you got two more. And it was devastating, okay? I still remember to this day, I was hurting out in the hallway. Stephen, the one who was supposed to pass along the message to me, he was crying the entire time we're getting the spankings. And so Mr. Chase comes out and sees him, and he's just in tears, broken. And Mr. Chase says, Stephen, I think you've learned your lesson. You can just go on back to class. Not fair at all. Not fair at all. I tell you guys that to tell you this. When I was a teenager, I did not get what worship was about. I didn't understand the significance of this time of what we just went through. To me, it was just something you do. You listen or whatever, maybe sing some, but I didn't really see any significance to it. It didn't really matter to me. I didn't understand it. And there was a point in my life when my life was changed by God, and worship all of a sudden took on a really different significance to me. It changed my life. And so there's probably 3 or 4 things that I could point to in my life that I say, these are the major things when God really got a hold of me. Things like accountability, right? And worship, though, was right there. Worship was such a huge part of my life, changing and understanding that I can relate and connect with God, that I can have these moments where it's just me and him together, and it's amazing. I never understood before. And so my heart for the students that I'm over, okay, at Refuge, my heart for this church is that we would be a people who would understand the significance and the power and the special opportunity we have every time we come together to worship. That this is the most amazing thing we get to do here on earth is just worship God. Like it is so amazing. And when you get it, it can change your life. And so this morning, I want to talk to you guys a little bit about worship. And there's a passage in John 4:23. It says, "Yet a time is coming and has now come when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks." And there was a moment during Come to the Altar when it just kind of like hit me. Like this verse takes place with like the woman at the well, and she's talking to Jesus about what do we have to do to follow God? Like where's it supposed to happen? What's it supposed to look like? And she was a broken, messed up person. But like there was a line in Come to the Altar when it says, "When you've come to the end of yourself." And it just kind of struck me, like when Jesus said like the Father is seeking these true worshipers, like she was one of the ones he was seeking. Like this woman, this sinful woman, she was one of the ones he was seeking because she had come to the end of herself. She'd come to the end of her rope. And she had nowhere to look to but God. And like I was just like, that was insight like while I was like worshiping. Like, I mean, the band this morning, can you all just give it up for them real quick? Because it was so good. Come on, let's give it up. It was awesome this morning. I just absolutely loved the worship time we had together this morning. But this is what I want to talk about for a moment this morning, is that the Father is seeking true worshipers. And seeing if there's true worshipers, that would mean there also can be false worshipers, right? And so it's not a question of whether you're a worshiper, it's just a question of like, what are you worshiping? Because we're all worshiping something, okay? I showed this video to my youth, and the music is a little more geared towards youth. I didn't have time to kind of update it for you guys. And some of the events they're at are more youthy looking events. So if you need to like plug in like the Beach Boys or Jimmy Buffett or, you know, whatever your thing is, go ahead and just kind of use your imagination and show that clip, Braden. So you may say to yourself, I'm just not like that into worship, or I'm just not a good worshiper. A lot of times we say things like, I'm just not a person that likes to sing, or I just don't like expressing myself in crowds of people. All those things like we say. And I would just say to you that we're all worshipers. Worship is just about expressing what values. It's a response of what you value most, and you're just showing that. Okay, so you may say like I'm not a worshiper, but like if you go to a Florida football game, like all of a sudden if people saw you and they didn't know any better, and you turn the sound down and put it like in a church setting, you'd be like, wow, that's a worshiper. Like no, you guys, we can all worship really well. Like you get somewhere where it's something that you value, that you love, that you appreciate, that you're excited about, you know how to worship. Nobody has to teach you. Like my son Wyatt and I went to Kentucky not Final Four, I wish. It was just like the first round of the NCAA tournament last year. You got a picture of this, I think. We went down there and we had these great seats, and all around us are all these different fans of different teams, and like nobody had to coach them. Like when your team scores, like stand up and it just was like natural, and it happened. There's so much energy in the room. People are like excited and showing what they care about, right? But we can worship all kinds of stuff, but not everything is equally important or equally valued to be worshiped. Everyone worships something, but not everything should be worshiped. Romans 1:25 and the New Living Translation says, they traded the truth about God for a lie. So they worshiped and served things God created instead of the Creator himself, who is worthy of eternal praise. See, we're always worshiping. The question is just, what are we going to worship? We're always seeking after something, finding value in something, meaning in something. The question is what you're seeking and finding value in the most important thing? See, Jesus says, I want you to be worshipers of me, not just because he just wants it all for himself, but he knows every other thing that we could worship, every other thing that we could put value in and find our significance in will leave us feeling hollow and empty in the end. He is the only thing that can satisfy and give life to us. Jesus says this, that we can give good worship to a bad God, but we can also give bad worship to a good God. We can give good worship to a bad God. We can also give bad worship to a good God. Jesus said in Matthew 15, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. Their worship is a farce. So God is seeking, he's actively looking for true worshipers. That means that like he is on the search, he's on the hunt. In the world right now, who will worship me? Who will give me their hearts? Who will be a true worshiper? And one of the things I love about Jesus is that Jesus, everywhere he went, there would be crowds all around him and people kind of shouting his name, people that were interested in him, people that were there to try to trick him and trip him up in some way. And amidst this whole crowd of people, Jesus continually would notice the one person who was like desperate for him. People like blind Bartimaeus, who was saying, Son of David, have mercy on me. Son of David, have mercy on me. Jesus sees him amongst a crowd of people. A little short guy that's climbing up in a tree that feels like nobody could love or care about him, Zacchaeus. Jesus stops by that tree and says, no, like I see you. You matter to me. He always is noticing these individuals whose hearts are kind of turned towards him. These people that are worshiping. And I love this story in Mark chapter 12. It's one of the best examples of this, of God actively seeking out true worshipers. Jesus is at the temple, and it says Jesus sat down near a collection box at the temple, and he watched as crowds dropped in their money. Many rich people put in large amounts. Then a poor widow came, and she dropped in 2 small coins. Jesus called the disciples to him and said, I tell you the truth, this poor widow, she's given more than all the others who are making their contributions. For they gave a tiny part of their surplus, but she is as poor as she is, she gave everything she had to me. So there's this widow, right? And she's in the temple. And I want you to imagine this for a second. This is kind of funny if you think about this, okay? Jesus, hopefully I don't feedback here. Jesus is in the temple, and it says that he's kind of like, he's got like a seat. And like, this is like the box, like where people are walking by giving money. And Jesus is like watching. He's just watching. Like, I mean, can you imagine? Like Jesus is here in the temple and he's just like watching as people give. And like, he's saying to himself, who's going to give their best? Like he's evaluating their giving. That's kind of a crazy thought, right? Like just this picture of Jesus watching and he sees this woman and she gives everything. She gives her best. And Jesus holds her up and says, wow. Like she gave everything. She gave everything. It's a good question to ask ourselves. If Jesus was here with us this morning, he is, and he was looking at us and evaluating us, what would he say about us? Would he say that, wow, Lauren gave her best this morning? Kyle, he gave his best this morning. Would he look around the room and he sees each of us as individuals and he sees our hearts? What would he see in us? Would he see us giving our best? Now, this isn't even about like the offering time, okay? But that's part of it. But it's just about being here with him, those that really want to connect with him during worship. Like, are we really here to experience and encounter him? Or is our mind other places? Is our mind thinking about all the stuff in our life? And Jesus is, like every once in a while we kind of think about him in the moment and then we kind of go back to what we were worried about. Maybe we're sitting there kind of in our mind complaining about the song selection. Man, like Jordan, why can't, he doesn't even finish the whole song and goes into another song. That's so confusing. No, I love it. Like I'm ADD, like let's never finish a song. Let's always keep jumping around. So God's looking around saying, are people giving their best? Are they fully engaged, fully here in this moment? Or are we just here like going through the motions? Just doing the same old, just, we're here, God. You're welcome. We'll be back next week. Just going through the motions. We know what it feels like when someone's going through the motions, right? Like we all know it. My mom is an amazing gram to my kids. And so this past week, she wrote them like handwritten letters. I don't think they even appreciate this, but Graham is like, she's writing them each individual cards, and Harper gets hers first, and she doesn't even know she doesn't know what the other two look like, but she gets hers, and she opens it with Lauren, and so they're looking at it, and it's just like a picture. It's a card that has like a picture on the front, and then the only thing inside the card, Graham wrote, the people who did these paintings did them with their hands, with their mouth and feet only. Amazing. But she didn't sign it, Graham. She didn't say Harper. Like, that was it. The people who did these cards did them with their mouth and feet only. Amazing. And so Harper has the card. It's laying there. I was like, oh, is that from Graham? She's like, yeah, Graham sent me this card. Wyatt and Emery open up their cards, and like they're a novel. They're like multiple pages long. Graham's talking to them about specific events in their lives. She addresses them, my like dearest Emery and Wyatt, right? She closes it up with like, love Graham. And when Harper saw this and saw Wyatt's card, like where Graham has to like turn it over on the back to keep writing, and her little card that just says, amazing. Like, Harper all of a sudden went from like feeling okay to where she was like devastated. Like she was saying things like she didn't even write my name on the card. She didn't even sign it, Graham, or love Graham, anything. And she was kind of trying to make herself feel better. And it's like, I think Graham's like hand must have got tired from writing so much on the other two's cards that she just couldn't. So we called Graham just to give her a hard time and laugh about it. And she said that there was an additional like letter that she'd included with Harper's card that we didn't get. So that's what happened. But Harper knows this feeling, right, of like someone just going through the motions, and really more than that, just like getting leftovers. You know what it feels like just like that's all. She was tired, her hand was tired, so that's all she had left. I think that sometimes we bring leftovers to God. I think sometimes we bring God what's left. And I was just thinking about this. If I invited you over to my house and I said, like, I appreciate you. I want to show you how much I appreciate you by having a meal with you. And I invite you over to the house and you come over and I'm like, oh gosh, I kind of forgot you were coming. Let me just grab some stuff out of the fridge real quick, and I pull out this like apple, and oh, I've got this McDonald's guava cream pie. They're actually pretty good. And I'm like, you can even have the guava cream pie. I'll finish up the apple that I started earlier. How do you feel? Like, do you feel like appreciated? Do you feel like you matter? Probably not, unless you got the guava pie. You might be like, that was actually pretty good. Sometimes I think we come to church and in our lives even, and we're giving God leftovers with our resources. Like, we take care of all the stuff we need to take care of, even like stuff we just kind of want a little bit. Like, we take care of ourselves. And then if there's anything left over, like I'll throw something in the plate, Yeah, God, you matter so much, right? It's almost like sometimes leftovers are kind of like what we do usually like the thrift shops. Like, we take something to the thrift store and it's got some value to it because they're able to resell it, but it's just not quite valuable enough for us to care about keeping it any longer, right? And so there's a value, but it's something we're comfortable with letting go of, right? That would be like leftovers. And so in the Bible, there was this time when in the book of Malachi, people were bringing their leftovers to God. And God told them a little bit about what he felt about this. And he said in Malachi 1 verse 8, when you give blind animals as sacrifices, isn't that wrong? And isn't it wrong to offer animals that are crippled and diseased? Try giving these gifts like this to your governor and see how pleased he is, says the Lord of heaven's armies. So people are bringing stuff that they really don't care about, like stuff that's kind of on its last leg. And so I got a couple pictures. They were not bringing dogs, but this is just kind of to give us an image of like what the kind of stuff they're bringing. Braden, you got, yeah. So they were like, coming to the temple saying, God, this is my best, right? Braden, go to the next one. Just like, God, this is my best. And if you have a dog that looks like this, these are great animals still. Keep going. One more, last one, Braden. And just like, God, this is a sacrifice of praise that I bring to you. And, I hope that you appreciate this. And God's saying, like, I'm not pleased with this. Like, surprise, but I'm not. Like, I want your best. When you come, I want you to just, out of the overflow of your love for me, to give me, like, the first place, the priority of your life. And so I just want to talk for a second about what it looks like to give our best to God. And there's one story in Luke chapter 7 that I think is one of the best stories in the whole Bible. And this is in Luke 7, and it's a story of a sinful woman. And this sinful woman, she goes to this meal that she wasn't invited to. A Pharisee, a religious leader, invites Jesus to his home, and all these religious people have gathered together. And this sinful woman that everybody knew was a sinful woman shows up. And she walks into the house. And she walks up to Jesus, and there's a couple things about the story that are interesting. She bends down on her knees, and she begins to take this alabaster jar of perfume and pour it on Jesus' feet. She's weeping and crying tears, and she's drying his feet off with her hair, and she's just worshiping. And in this moment, you realize that, like, when this woman came, she gave her best. She gave her best because there's this priority to what she was giving, this purpose to it. Like, she came to that house with a gift to give. I mean, think about this. Like, she didn't just carry the perfume on her all the time. Like, she brought that alabaster jar to that house for a specific purpose, and it was a priority. This was valuable to her. It's all that she had that was of value. And so she brings it to this house, and she begins to pour it on Jesus' feet. And there's this passion inside of her. She's not going through the motions. She's weeping tears of a broken person that's at the end of themselves, right? She's at the end of herself. I don't have anywhere else to turn. I don't have any other hope. Like, you're my only hope. And she's weeping and drying Jesus' feet with her hair. And just this amazing picture, right, of what worship looks like to give God your very best. And I love what Jesus says. These religious people look at her and they're like, why is she so emotional? Why is she even here? Like, Jesus, don't you know who she is? She shouldn't be allowed here. Like, this is just for the good people, right? And Jesus tells a story about two people who are forgiven debts. One's forgiven a bigger debt and one's forgiven a small debt. And he says, who's gonna appreciate that forgiveness more? And they're like, the one who was forgiven the bigger debt. And Jesus is like, exactly. And in verse 47, Jesus says to them, I tell you, her sins, and they are many, have been forgiven. And she has shown me much love. But a person who's forgiven little shows only a little love. You see, when you know how much you've been forgiven, you're gonna love much. When you know how much Jesus has given of himself, the best that he gave, what God gave us that was the best gift that could ever be given, when you really grasp that in your own life, you can't come back and give leftovers to him. You just can't, because how could you? When you know that you've been given so much, when you've been forgiven so much, how could you bring just a little back? It doesn't work that way. Jesus says when you've been forgiven much, you will love much. And so I just want to ask you this morning, have you discovered this truth in your life? That you've been forgiven much? That you've been loved much? Maybe you've discovered it and you just need to remember it this morning. Remember how amazing this love, this forgiveness that has been offered to you. Remember the price that was paid for your life. Are we giving him our best? Are we giving Jesus everything that we have? You know, this morning, if you feel empty or stuck, you just feel like you're going through the motions, or you feel like just distant from God this morning, I would offer to you that perhaps you're giving your best worship to a bad God. You're giving your priority, you're giving your passions to something that will never fulfill you. And I just want to tell you, there's a better choice. There's a better option. There's a God who's given his best for you, and it is unlike anything else you will ever experience. When's the last time that you were just in awe of the presence of God in your life? When's the last time, like this woman, when you just didn't care? Like, she comes into this room, she's just in awe of Jesus, and she just doesn't care about who's around, who's looking at her, what she looks like, if she's got, tears and snot coming down. I mean, she doesn't care because she's there for Jesus, not for anyone else. Now, I was going to tell a story about a couple weeks ago when I was in the youth room by myself and worshiping and just having this awareness of the presence of God. But you know what? This morning when I was here in worship, I had the same exact thing. It felt like it was God and me alone in this room. Like, I was so aware of his presence. It was amazing. And guys, it's available to us anytime we want to tap into it. God is here. He wants to meet with us. James says, come near to God and God will come near to you. Don't miss the opportunity you have to connect with the thing that matters most in this world. This morning, we're going to close with a time of worship. And I just want to challenge you this morning to give God your best, whatever that looks like to you. That you would give God the priority of your worship. You give God all of your passion, all of your praise. That even if you don't feel like it, I love that song we were singing earlier when it says, even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. Some of you guys right now, your kids, your grandkids, you're worried about them. And like that should be like something you hang on to. God, even when I don't see it, you're working in their lives. Amen? God, even when I don't feel it and I don't feel like I can get close to you, or I don't feel like you can love me, God, I know even when I don't feel it, you're working in my life. I just want us to stand to our feet together this morning and let's just have a time of worship. And in this moment, I want to challenge you just to stretch yourself a little bit. Give God your best. And maybe that means that sometimes to get somewhere that we've never been, we have to do something we've never done before. And so maybe that means you need to come down to an altar and pray. Maybe that means you need to sit down on your knees and pray. Maybe it means you need to lift hands or close your eyes or whatever it is that you need to do to connect with God. I'm going to give you the next few moments.